futures at our feet.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. Apologies if you are listening to this and you're thinking, what's that voice that he's got on? It's gone a little bit funny. I've been a bit poorly over the last few days, but hey, I'll soldier on. Doesn't stop the podcast train from rolling. It's good to be here again for another episode of the podcast. We are joined in the studio by a guest who we'll introduce very, very soon. And we'll let them introduce themselves, actually. But Steve, it's nice to see you with your unusual background, not a normal background, because obviously we've been recording with no ceilings and plasterers working it. Is that it's nice to be in a new space, right?
It's nice to literally not have the ceiling or like having to have backgrounds to cover everything that was pushed into the kitchen and all those different complexities of just life, I guess. But Ben, I'm getting Phoebe Buffet vibes. I'll be honest.
Is that what you're getting?
Is it my sticky shoe? That sticky shoe. I don't know. Literally, Joe Cocker. Joe, you've never seen when the episode in Friends when Phoebe Buffet gets a voice and literally does anything to keep it because she thinks she sounds unbelievable. I think our listeners can make a choice of whether Ben needs to stay like this or get his old voice back for a period. That's up to Ben.
What we should use is get AI to replicate this voice, and every single time I'm speaking, that's what it could do. That would be the answer, right?
I can't believe you've been outside it with no top on, Ben, just to think that you can sound sexy with that voice, mate. It's just so inappropriate. I'll be honest.
I've never sounded sexy with any voice, my friend.
And this is when Emily's just like, what have I walked into here? Like, what is this? We talked about informality, Emily. And everything else, just get ready for it. This is just
anyway. Let's just stop talking about my sexy voice. We have got a guest in the studio who is like Steve saying, probably thinking, what on earth have I let myself in for? But we have got a guest all the way from Washington, over the pond. So we are very, very pleased that Emily is joining us. Tell us a little bit about you and maybe your background and experience of education before we talk about what you do now.
Sure. Hi, I'm Emily Musil. My experience with education ranges from both the beginning of my career, where I was a faculty member, college professor for a number of years, and then ran a big EdTech competition for a number of years for out-of-school children in Tanzania. I'm also a mother of 2 children who are in grade school, so there's that perspective. And then currently we're working on a future of education project. So, from being in school all the way through being a mom, through teaching, and through studying education, this is really something that I care deeply about and think about from lots of different angles.
And I often talk about my children. I've got 2 children. Ben's got 2 children that are getting a little bit older. We use a feral meter. How feral are your children, Emily?
Well,
do you mind?
It's gotten better post-COVID, I will say. I do have a teenage daughter, so I'll leave it at that.
So is Ben.
Okay.
Ben. Yeah.
Me too.
And then my son is 10. He's really in a mode of it's Star Wars, Pokemon, anime, manga. That's his vibe right now. So, we're doing okay over here. There was a lot of school that was closed for snow, so we had a lot of indoor activities recently.
So we'll say that Steve always introduces his children as 2 feral children, and I don't think it's actually very fair. They are lovely, lovely children, but
feral in the good sense. They are wonderful, curious, rebellious children.
Yeah.
Absolutely, literally, go to bed. That's probably the only thing that they comply with bedtime, which is such a strange one because normally kids will rebel at bedtime. My kids are just like, I'm ready to go to bed. But
wait, how old are they?
Ollie is 4, Ella is 5, 6 in the summer.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, you're like,
Mike. No
everybody's kids. Yeah, everyone's
going to bed when they get older.
Well, let's just see. But I always look at, and whenever people say, "Oh, teenage daughters," Ben, teenage daughter, yourself, teenage daughter. I will have a teenage daughter at some point, and I think I prefer feral youngster rather than teenage girl, I suppose. But let's see.
There's good things about every age. There's challenges and real beauty in every age. So just try to focus on that.
I've got 15 and 11-year-olds that are that way somewhere. So probably there'll be a bang or some kind of arguing or some kind of "Dad, do you want anything to eat?" type conversation, because usually that's what happened.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so obviously I know you mentioned there about your experience in education. Tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're doing at the Milken Institute. Have I said that right? Milken Institute. Tell us a
Yep.
little bit about what that is, if you could.
Yeah, Milken Institute. I'm managing director in our strategic philanthropy pillar. And we are headquartered in Santa Monica and Washington, D.C., where I'm based. We just opened our Milken Center here in D.C., which is free and open to the public. We've been around for about 30 years. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank, do a lot of convening, white papers, and then project-based work as well. We do have an office in London. So there's Milken Institute there in London, as well as Abu Dhabi, Singapore. So we're global at this point.
Yeah.
And our work right now, I mentioned before doing some work in future of education. With our strategic philanthropy, we're really trying to figure out how we can maximize people's impact capital. So when people are like, I want to do something good with my resources, which sometimes is your talent or your time. Often it's somebody's treasure, their money. We try to say, from a philanthropic standpoint, how can you use your money to have the highest impact to help people? So there's been a long history of Milken Institute doing work around education. So the Milken family, our founder, Michael Milken, and his family have done work with Milken Scholars, Milken Educator Awards, the Milken Center I mentioned in DC. One of its 4 pillars is around education. But for us on the strategic philanthropy side, we really just started to realize how passionate a lot of people were about education, but not really sure where they should get started or what part of education. So we partnered last year with a group called CodePath, and we worked on a report that came out in November called The Computing Imperative. And since that time, we have launched our Future of Higher Ed roadmap. So that will be coming out in a few months, where we're identifying specific to higher ed and sort of the higher education workforce pipeline, what we see as some of the main areas where we think there could be high impact.
So is it, obviously we'll go back to the Institute. So is it very regionalized, or is it very focused based on the work that you do in the US is focused on the US, the work that is done in London is focused on the EU, or is it actually transnational and transcontinent, where ultimately a lot of those will see trends that are global and all come together rather than being very siloed as an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are global, and it depends on what topic we're talking about. So things like climate, for example, our environmental work, that is global. There's one planet we're living on. And at the same time, we do look at some things regionally. So for example, when we go to Abu Dhabi every year, that's our Middle East Africa summit, we really are focused on the region. So it's not one particular country per se, and we bring in people from all over the globe, but we try to say, what are some of the issues and investments and things in that particular region? Similar with our Asia summit in Singapore. So that's really looking at the Asia region. And then we have some projects that are specific to the US, or there's places like we've had dinners with philanthropists in London. So it's both. We really want to say, what is needed? How can we bring people together to talk across sector and really think about how they can use their capital and other resources to help people have more meaningful lives? So their, financial health and mental health, physical health, all of those things. And so, yeah, some of them are, we try to think globally, but make sure that we have some regional focus when it's really helpful.
It's really interesting because we often see waves of trends, and ultimately they often will be education focused for us, like holistic education, agency with guardrails, culture before strategy, all of those kind of things come out from us. But philanthropy is actually a trend over the last couple of months that we're seeing, isn't it, Ben? And it's really positive to see that conflict compared to a lot of the news that we see over here. I'm sure America's the same, where there's lots of people with a lot of money not doing great things, to actually hear that there's some wonderful people, whether that's giving up their money, giving up their time, making a difference. It's really nice to see. So it'd be really interesting to hear, how that's linked into the strategies and the white papers. How does that all come together in terms of, is that the investment, or actually does more volunteering come off the back of the white papers that are published, in terms of, is that a structure, or is it just very different from time to time, Emily?
Yeah, well, our convenings will often be part of what we are listening, bringing people together, and will feed into the white papers. And then afterwards, we also do our own independent research. So there's a little bit of both. We also have our government affairs team that does some things that are specific to the US. And when we're trying to say what sort of policies, again, we're nonprofit, nonpartisan, but we make recommendations for things that we think would be useful. But they also work with the UN, World Bank, all of our global offices. So really trying to say what are ways that we can see how we can cooperate and communicate across borders. What we're trying to do right now with this roadmap, that I'm just going to dive into this part because it's actually something I'm really excited about. So one of the things we've seen with AI disruption, in the beginning, people were saying, okay, it's going to be manufacturing jobs, that sort of thing. Really, there's a lot of conversation on how this is for the knowledge economy. So, you joked earlier, Ben, about AI replacing your voice, but we all know that's the reality. There's lots of podcasts now that have AI personalities. All sorts of industries are getting, one could say helped, others could say disrupted, but certainly AI is impacting all of it. So for us as a think tank, part of what we were doing is saying not only what sort of recommendations do we want to have, but how might we be disrupted as well. So as a think tank that gives out advice and does a lot of research, that is certainly an area where we're saying, how can we leverage AI, really have that still in a way that we are a trusted source, that our research is solid, and that we can also use this new technology. So part of that also to do with updating our methodology. Now, excuse me, if it gets too wonky, you can pull me back out. But we trained the team last year in strategic foresight and future casting, because part of this was really when we are in a period with such quickly advancing technology, how do we make sure that we are looking at the trends and looking ahead so that when we are creating these reports or our recommendations, we're not responding only to what has been. And of course, we're looking at data, but we're also saying, what are all the trends and signals that we can see so that as we make choices about how do we want to have better educational systems 10 years from now, when all of our kids will be way either out of school or further along in school, 10 years from now, what does that look like for the kids we all just talked about? So if we can envision what that looks like and have as close a sense as we can, then you go backwards and you backcast and say, okay, what do we need to be doing right now to get to a positive version of that future? So that's been one sort of exciting part.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting as well. And especially if we're to believe some of the people who suggest the technological advances and how quickly they're going to come, 10 years in education is probably going to look very different. 10 years ago, education doesn't look very different than it does now. There is some bits in terms of how much ChatGPT is helping kids do their homework, but other than that, there's not much difference. We had that break where we were a bit online, and in fact, interestingly, when we're recording this, in some areas of the world, they're having to go back online because of the nature of the challenges in the world currently. But the thing that navigates for me is that what the Institute is trying to pull together, especially with that computing in this imperative report, is trying to get, okay, well, AI literacy as a concept and how we use and computing and AI as a new basic literacy in comparison to what we would have normally have a literacy and numeracy. They were the core skills. We're saying these computing technology AI literacies are actually the new core skills, aren't they? Or at least part of it, to ensure that not just America's, and I know that conversation there is about making sure America is still competitive, but also what do we do as a global audience to make sure that we are ready for, I say not ready for the changes because I don't think we can prepare for the changes if we don't know what they are. But very interesting that you said that you've been training your team in future casting and foresighting, because it's not necessarily about knowing what the future is. It's about how do we pivot and develop change in that space. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what the report has shown around AI literacy, if you could.
Sure. So one of the things that we talk about as fundamental is that we want learners of all ages. So this is preschool, and we are really looking at the whole continuum up to us, people who are already in the workforce, well into our careers. So really that AI literacy, not just being something that lives in the world of computer science, or it's something that, 10 years ago, most people, it existed, but it wasn't really part of people's daily lives or the way that we think. There's a shift when we talk about literacy, AI literacy. We don't mean that everybody has to have the exact same skills, but any sort of learning that you do or job in the future is going to be, and probably I would argue most already have, really embedded with artificial intelligence. So if you don't start those skills at a really young age, and a lot of schools have not quite caught up to teaching, updating their curriculum, and having the skills and the mindset for adapting to what we're going to need in the future.
It's really interesting because one of the challenges, and one of the, I suppose, is it a worry for schools, is, I don't know if it's English based, or I think it's just probably globally, we do a terrible job at raising the bar and making sure that our young people can be with English, with actual literacy and numeracy. We do a terrible job apparently at that anyway. Is it a worry that we're going to try teaching AI, or we're worried about teaching AI because we think, well, we don't do a great job of it the way that we do it, and going to try and teach AI in the same way that we teach English and math, or maths over here? And is that one of the things that ultimately we say, oh, everybody needs the same curriculum, everybody needs exactly the same, where ultimately AI should allow the teaching of AI to be a personalized experience? And maybe we're just going wrong thinking about it has to be exactly the same as what we've always done. I don't know if I've asked the question the right way, but I just think that that's the thing where we go, oh, we're not going to be able to do it. It's like, well, maybe think differently how we do it then, how we approach it, how we absorb it, everything.
Exactly. Well, I think, Steve, when you were talking about your kids and you're saying they're feral, they're curious, this idea of, they're out doing things, experiencing the world in a way that is maybe structured differently. I don't know what your childhood was like, but, that they're out doing something. That idea of, even when you're saying feral, what that probably means is they're not doing things exactly like every other kid, or they're not following the exact same sort of rigid schedule as somebody else, or even day to day. I think that's exactly the type of thing that we are looking for. So, that's going to be the future of education, I believe. And when you talk about individualized learning, so that I also believe is key to the future. We have seen already with advances in technology, also our understanding of neuroscience, how the brain works, that you can actually have faster results and better results for people when they have individualized learning. This does not mean we're saying get rid of human interactions, get rid of, teachers, anything like that. It means, where can you be more efficient? It's what we should all be asking in any of our sectors, I believe. Where can you be more efficient in learning? I mentioned earlier briefly that there was this project that I did in Tanzania with XPRIZE. So we ran, it was called the Global Learning XPRIZE. We ran a 5-year project in the Tanga district of Tanzania. Ben, you said previously, what education looked like 10 years ago. So this was about 10 years ago that we had this project. And what came out of that project was really understanding how much these children, who are about 9 to 10 years old on average, and this was across 140 communities, how much they could learn in 1 hour a day, having personalized software for them. So we have known that technology can do this for a long time. We have learned more about how the human brain, and particularly the child brain, can learn. The question is, what have we done in the last 10 years to take that sort of knowledge and what we know is possible and make it something that is accessible and that is throughout the curriculum, so that it's really updating our educational systems?
And I'm going to stick with the HE vibe, because ultimately, and I'm definitely not bashing HE as a collective, but what's really interesting is the ability for HE to actually transform and change itself. If you think of how it's structured as an organisation, I remember speaking to, I don't know if it was a vice chancellor or a dean over here, Somebody basically runs a university, and I won't say which university from a previous role. And I was having a conversation with them, and they were telling me about how much they were talking about business, and they were talking about how much money they made from international students, and they were saying how much money they made from the lettings that they actually own, buildings and apartment blocks or places where learners would stay. And they talked about that. And then they talked about how they didn't spend a lot of time talking about the education pathway in higher education. And I knew this person a little bit, so I could be a little bit frank with them. And I just said, are you a travel agent? Or are you a lettings business? Or are you an education organisation? Because what's really interesting, if you make more money from international travel from students, I know they're coming to learn, and you make more money from the learners that are coming over and stopping with you. The problem is the ability to move online and want to move to education and new models is going to be really challenging because you make more money from those two things rather than the education purpose of your business. And I think that's one of the challenges that it's going to be really hard to reform and transform higher education because of ultimately, and right, if they're running a business, that's what makes them the most money. So I do get it. But actually, if we're trying to transform the learning experience of universities, AI could play a massive part into universities and higher education as a whole. But will there be resistance, I guess, is the question, because of those metrics? And I'm putting you on the spot, and you're going, I can't answer these questions because I'm working with these people. You can say no, and we can move on. That's absolutely fine. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
I want to talk about higher ed all day long, so I'm
Okay.
happy to jump right in. Will there be resistance? Let me tell you, having been in higher education as a sector for over 10 years, yes, there will be resistance. That's what academics are trained to do. And thank goodness, because it's supposed to be a place where you question and you challenge things and you challenge systems. It is also another part of the education system that is slower to change in many parts. Now, there are exceptions to this. So the business model you talked about, Steve, that is a question, because universities do have to think about how are they able to be sustainable. There is massive disruption in higher ed. And this one, I may speak a little more to the US system. So please, I'm just not as familiar with the UK higher ed system, but the costs here are basically unaffordable for most families in the US for going to university in the United States. There's also demand from the students to have different types of skill set. There's a decrease in the amount of jobs they can get after they get a university degree, which has been for a long time really a pathway to economic mobility and secure jobs of the future, is getting a university degree. Now, there's lots of other benefits, lots of things, most students will leave home for a while. They have great experiences there. So there's that. But there's really a demand and a need for change. We are seeing some really innovative new models across the university spectrum. So people have talked about large schools like Arizona State University, for example, has quite a few things that they have done to be innovative. One university that we have partnered with here at the Milken Institute is Drew University, a small liberal arts college in Madison, New Jersey. Listen, small liberal arts colleges have some real questions to ask. Parents are saying, why should I pay this amount for a private university? And what does it get for my child, or for the learner themselves if they're the ones putting themselves through university? So Drew has just announced an experimental, first of its kind, two things. One, they're having a K-8 2-hour learning school on their campus. So it's the first university to have this sort of child-driven 2-hour learning model where they just do project-based the rest of the day on campus. And then the other thing is they've just announced an experimental liberal arts, high-tech, new university on campus. So they are just starting to pilot that and say, what does it look like? So it doesn't have the same governance structure, doesn't have the same, departments or majors. And it's really based on this sort of 60 or 70 years of learning. So saying, can this be a center of learning where you're coming back? Can you get stackable credentials? Not necessarily just the 4-year, more traditional way of thinking about what university, or we say college experience here in the US is. That sort of thinking to just try it. Is it going to be successful? We don't know. What exactly is it going to look like? They're going to have to build it. But having that sort of vision and audacity to just say, we need to try something new and we need to start now to do something new to meet the demands of tomorrow is really exciting. So that's where I feel optimistic, seeing things like that in higher education.
And I think if that reimagination piece that we're talking about there is going, we've done this for hundreds of years, and the vast majority of the model hasn't shifted very much. But then when you've got something that super powers and supercharges and uses all those super acronym adverbs and adjectives that everybody wanting to put on their AI tools, right? Like when you've got that in that higher education world, where at one point the HE organizations were the gatekeepers of knowledge, weren't they? And they access, and you mentioned this already, the access to knowledge is kind of moved from being a few to being an increased amount. It's not everybody, because we've still got equity issues and we've still got some people are still gatekeepers in that space. But when we're in that space of thinking that you go to school for this period of time, you go to school for college for this period of time, you go to university for this period of time, and then your learning's finished, and then you go into the big wide world and get a job. The fact that AI is shifting people's job roles, technology is moving people's job roles. People don't do jobs for life, and that need for lifelong learning that sits into that space, it becomes that need of, are we repositioning, as both you and Steve have kind of talked about, into that space? Is that kind of how you're positioning at the Institute to try and help with this strategic philanthropy into that space could help navigate some of that? Is that, am I barking up the wrong tree, or am I on the right tree?
That's the right tree. Yeah, we really are looking at it as this continuum. So you'll notice from the report that we put out in November to the roadmap that's coming out, when we talk about learning, it's really this ongoing just part of the human experience. The fact that we segment things so often, this is primary school, this is, university learning, this is professional development. We are all people who are trying to engage with the world around us and figure out how to make sense of it. How do we solve complex problems? Now, there are different ways that you want to approach it that are age appropriate and also life situation appropriate. So the way you're going to talk about computational thinking with a 4-year-old versus a teenager versus, somebody who's already in the workforce, you're going to have different ways that you go about both engaging and increasing the skills at those levels. But ultimately, it is this continuum. For this to work, part of what I want to bring up, and that we've been really thinking about at the Institute, is how do you need to engage across sectors? So, for example, if I want to go and get a credential in something, my employer is going to have to be on board with that. So we need to think about, what does work look like in the future? That's part of education that employers will have to say, okay, how do we create that flexibility? They're probably not going to send you off for 4 years to go join a, fraternity and whatever you might have done in your university years, but to give people some time and ability and flexibility to do that. You also, at some points in your life, may be able to physically go and live somewhere for some amount of time. Other points, we keep talking about, all of us have kids here, 6 kids collectively on this call. There are other points, it's harder to go away for a long period of time, for example, when you have young children. So thinking about how society as a whole is approaching this, from when you are a young child to when you are, early in your career, mid-career. I would even say, people keep talking about 60-year learning. If my 82-year-old father were here, he would say, hey, what about me? He's still out doing work, doing environmental work and working on getting his skills, updated constantly as well. So this is your whole lifetime.
It's really interesting what you said about old people going back to fraternities. Made me feel about or think about the Will Ferrell Old School movie, a movie that always lives in my brain. But I don't want to go. I don't want to go to that space. Absolutely not. As much as I love the movie, running naked through the quad is definitely not something that should be praised or done by adults.
Steve, are you? Is that the best part of the movie? Is that what we're talking about?
It is absolutely, George. Frank the Tank is probably the best part of the movie.
Frank the
Tank. But I suppose being serious, if I ever could be, it's then thinking about actually the responsibility of your organisation is there is real strategic thinking and large-scale investment, even though it's not per se your own, that could have a massive impact across all sectors and the world if you get it right. No pressure for you, Emily, and everybody else. But ultimately, what does that look like when you are mobilising hundreds, if not thousands and billions and everything else of pounds, dollars? But how do you then look strategically in terms of how much money goes to where? And also, how do you marry it up with ultimately co-investment and everything else to then look in Americas or look in Europe, Middle East and Africa or Asia and then say, actually, where do we align with the trends? Where do we align with what's going to happen? To then look at the talent needed and the strength of where it goes to every single region. How does that even work? Because that's just hurt my brain even thinking about it or even reading what Ben had put in the notes. It's a really interesting thing, isn't it? So maybe step into that.
Sure. That's, I think, one of the most exciting things about the work, because so many people get overwhelmed or don't know where to start. So when you think about people using their money for good, which you made that comment earlier. So many people want the world to be better and say, how can I help? So what we think about is how can we guide people to say, here's a really good place to get started. One of the exciting things about philanthropy, specifically when you're using philanthropic dollars, which means you don't need a quick turnaround on investments, return on your investment. So you can be really patient. At the same time, you can also deploy capital really quickly because it's your money or your company's money or whatever it is. So you can act quickly, you can be patient, you can try things, you can be experimental in a way that a lot of times you can't do that in other areas. So what we really look at is where can we use that sort of capital to catalyze something? So we'll say, okay, where is there need that you need to try something? A lot of times you ask, what does that look like? So a lot of times that can mean something like piloting a new program. Can we get the data to show that this works so that then when you get to the scaling part, and that's when you really get into the hundreds of millions and billions of pounds or dollars or whatever currency, to be able to scale that, people then do need to be really careful of that investment, particularly if it's public money. If you think about any of the public schools, my children are in public school, for example, that is government and state money. They have to be very careful with those funds to make sure it's something that's going to work. So if we as philanthropy can come in and say, here are things that are proven. We have done all these pilots. We've gotten this data. This is what works. You can help to really shift those sort of systems. Sometimes it looks like alternative systems. So there's a lot of schools that may be private or outside that maybe people can't all afford. So how do you make sure that learning is equitable? So there's ways that people can go and invest in areas or different types of schools. There's things that philanthropy can do in terms of getting credit to people who are starting different businesses. So that may be a new technology, for example. So there's all of these things that we can look at, lots of different levers we can pull, where philanthropy can say, going in to use money for effective good that then will be handed over so that it can then scale. Philanthropy can't fix every problem. Philanthropy cannot make up for government dollars that aren't being spent in a certain place. But philanthropy can be quick, be patient, be experimental, and it can catalyze.
I like this. I like that we're not just talking about how money's going to solve the problem. Money will help solve the problem, but it's not the only thing that needs to sit in that mix. It's the fact of people working together. There needs to be the government and regional, federal, state, or whatever else that looks like, even in the UK. Alignment, schools need to tie in, EdTech companies need to tie in, all the people working together, those broader organisations that affect education that aren't actually involved in education, so the health and the social care and the other bits that go with it, housing. But I like this idea of how there are a lot of people, aren't there, who want to make a difference and do something. Like Steve said, we've had a number of those on the podcast recently. It's funny how like you said, I clicked that trend, Steve, that you spotted there. The amount of people who have been on the podcast recently who have built success somewhere and then thought, do you know what? I've got a image been given much is expected, right? So I've got to do something with what I've been given. I've got to make sure that it's not just about me, and it's not just about me continuing that legacy. It's about how do I have impact. Now, I think as that becomes kind of beyond just the money, beyond just the let's throw a load of stuff at something, and that's somehow that's going to fix it. That also is replicated in the principle that many of our organizations at both sides of the pond are absolutely in love with a buzzword or a buzz phrase. So they'll think about like supercharging, AI literacy, critical thinking, as if like these things, because we're talking about them, are now beyond the buzzword. But you mentioned that computational thinking earlier about how you speak differently to little ones than you would do to a university student or beyond. What do you think is the solution or solutions or possible ideas to help kind of embed this beyond this AI literacy, this use of computational thinking beyond just the buzzword really? And by the way, for those people who aren't hearing, would you just tell us what you mean by computational thinking as well? Because I think some people will be listening to it and go, "Oh, that's another buzzword that I'm not entirely sure about." So maybe tell us a little bit about that, and then how can we embed it? Would be my question.
Sure. Okay, so that, earlier we talked about sort of different stages of learning. So computational thinking, when you're at the earliest ages, preschool, early elementary school, that's something like your systems thinking. So the way that you might organize patterns, you might recognize patterns. It's really thinking through how you would sort of have steps to something. So when you get a little bit older, that might be early kind of coding or robotics. You want to get into then design thinking as you get a little bit older. So how do you come to a solution for something? In higher ed, that's also just really complex questions. So saying, how do we have this type of thinking that works alongside technology, but it's the way that you approach it. So there's certain skills you might have needed to have before. Coding is a big one people talk about a lot, that AI is accelerated. What we're thinking about now, that computational thinking becomes even more important for how do you use tech? How do we think about systems? How do we use it in that way? So it's really kind of building blocks to other skills. Not everyone is going to be an expert engineer, although we do need those. So there's these sort of two things going on at once, that you need people who have really high tech skills because we want creators of technology. But whatever the sort of learning path someone has or career they want to pursue, they're going to need to be able to interact and understand technology. Think about the ways that they are programmed. Think about sort of patterns that you would use, and think about things in a really complex way. Break it down into more digestible pieces to solve those sort of problems. I think one of the things that we've really been working with, and what we've been hearing from as we've been talking to people, is how is this something that the AI plus, you might have seen in the report, we're using the words AI plus, so other advanced technologies. Everybody's talking about generative AI, but there's lots of things we're looking at. How is that something that we can work with and keep the human-centered piece of all of this? This is why it's not just it's not just the computational or computing skills. It's not just computer science, although we love all of those skills in those fields. How do we understand human bias, human choices, empathy, human connection? This is where I get really excited when I see educational models that can combine things in the way that we've touched upon a little bit already in our conversation. Things like you take 1 to 2 hours of really focused, individualized learning so that the three of us may be at very different points in terms of algebra or whatever it might be. And we can all still be sitting next to each other and having that sort of a personalized help where we are. And then we shut down the computers after that, and we all build something together. And we figure out how to cooperate and communicate with each other, and we build. And that can be true for children. That can be true in the workplace. So you can have this sort of focused, high-tech area, and then you can also have a very human interactive piece. So that tension, it's something that some people have a lot of anxiety around. What does it mean to be human in the future? Others aren't talking about it and just talking about the tech skills. So really that weaving together of the human experience and high tech is something we just hear a lot about and take a lot of time to think about.
I know a lot about humans there. We do spend a lot of time talking about human intelligence and artificial intelligence and all of that world and how they need to come together. My question is around humans, really. And for such a long decades, probably ever since I was born, I always identified America as being hyper competitive. Not, we're not talking about recent conflict and all of that. We talk about just as a nation, you are proud, you are competitive, especially in sports. I'm a sports person, and wow, they want to win everything. That's fine, but I suppose as from you, your organisation, how do you kind of balance your work with keeping America as an or your organisation as the best or hyper competitive, winning the race, while also making sure that computer education reaches all communities, all nations, not just the privileged people that you do. How do you continue to do that? Because I'm sure it is a balance in the US and always has been, never more present than now, I guess.
That is true. I'm going to have the best answer.
Do it,
Okay.
absolutely.
So one, I'm going to use an example from a tool in our toolbox that we talk about when we talk to our philanthropists, which is incentivized prizes and competitions. So yes, as Americans, it is deep in part of our culture to be competitive in sports and other things. Anybody who's been watching the Olympics, you can see that, listening to the cowbells. I also think that's a human trait. People do really want to compete, and they want to be given the chance to compete. So one of the things that we really love to work with philanthropists with is prizes. This is something where we set up a challenge and say, who has a really great idea? And then that idea has to go and actually do something good and positive in the world. So we use that competition model for good. And, we have a prize purse, for example, right now. One of our prizes we work with the Motsepe Foundation of South Africa. We have the Milken Motsepe Prize. We give out $2 million just as money to support people. We don't take any equity, anything like that. And we talk to people, of course, who doesn't want to win $2 million? That sounds great. But we build into it this idea of, okay, you're competing for something, but it really is ultimately for the goal of having something that's going to help everybody. And it's amazing that it may sound corny, but it makes me believe in the human spirit, because it's maybe ignited with that competition model. But then ultimately, when you talk to people, it's not about the money. It's not about even people who don't end up winning $1 million grand prize or anything like that. They feel like they worked together to try to solve a major problem. So yes, we have a strong competitive spirit here in the US, but that prize that I just mentioned, Milken Motsepe Prize, we have over 12,000 people on our platform from 136 countries around the world, many of them in sub-Saharan Africa. That competitive spirit and the drive to try to do something better, to harness the incredible power of technology we have to do something better, it is global. It is around the world. You just have to give people the opportunity to feel like they can be at that starting gate and that they have an opportunity to have their ideas get out there.
Yeah, I love that. But if anybody wants to send me £1 million, I'm cool with that as well. But it's not about that. But it would help. I don't mind. And so it's really interesting you say that as well, because I know that's really interesting. Steve's normal phrase, but it's really interesting that you say that, because obviously we're doing our Edufuturist Awards that are coming up, and part of the thing around that's coming up in June this next year in the UK. One of the best things about that is the fact of people recognizing each other and people supporting each other. And Steve says this quite a lot, don't you? That it's amazing when you announce a shortlist and people are like, "Wow, it's amazing that I've been shortlisted for this award." But then go, I can't believe I'm in this company. These people that have also been shortlisted and the other bits that go with it. And I can't believe that. And then championing each other, tagging other people and saying how good it is. That there's something in that as well. So that collegiality, and as long as America win, as long as they help other people with it, that's fine, isn't it? That's what really matters. As long as you rising tide lifts all ships, and that's the principle, isn't it? I'm joking. What we need to do is do the World Series of baseball. Only America are in it, but it's a World Series. I'm joking. Anyway, how to win? We're nearly finished the podcast, so like if you never speak to us again because I've been making jokes about America, then that's fine. But we always finish our podcast with 3 quick-fire questions, and we don't share these with our guests. But if anybody's been listening, you'll see that they haven't changed a little bit. We might change them up soon. And so the 3 quick-fire questions. I'll ask the first one. Steve will ask the second one, then I'll ask the last one.
Okay.
So our first one. This is one of my favourites. So if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy them, what would change overnight?
If schools were like restaurants, and how much if they were rated, and what was the last part? What would
change overnight?
Oh, almost everything. I think there would be a lot more play at all levels. I think there would be more collaborative work, less lining up, sitting in a square, filling out A, B, C, D, less graded in a particular way, probably fewer standardized tests, more tech and more human interaction, more arts, more sports.
Definitely more sports in America. Okay, what's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
The most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change is this is the way I was trained. It's for the best. We know this pedagogy works. This method works. Yeah,
that's fair enough. They've done it that way, and they think it's that way. Yeah, and that's cool. Last one, and then you're free, and there'll be no more American insults, Stephen.
I've got my friends live in America. Their children are Americans.
I know. My friends live in America.
Are Americans.
Yeah, they are. I don't ever speak to them, but they live over there. I've not spoken to them since they moved because I hate them. Anyway, no, I'm only joking. Over 51% of our audience is American, so let's not cut them off, Ben. That's the interesting bit.
So, if a 10-year-old asked you why they had to go to school, what would you actually say?
Well, I certainly get that question regularly since I have a 10-year-old. And I say because it is a place to learn and grow. And so mommy can do podcasts.
And so can we. That's exactly what I say to. It's not a 10-year-old; it's a 5-year-old for me. What, Daddy? What do you even do for work? I try to explain it to a 5-year-old often, but I'm just like, it's just so you go to school and Daddy'll work. They keep asking what Daddy does for work, and I can't explain it. I'm a transponster, going back to the friends thing. But yeah, Emily, it has been an absolute pleasure to explore, to delve, to learn what you do, what the Milken Institute does, and ultimately what so many people are actually giving back into. The trend that we're seeing is so many people are not trying to raise enough money to go to Mars. They're not trying to be the first trillionaire. What they're doing is, you know what, they see it, they love it, they're passionate about it, and they want to make the world a better place by investing their time, their money, and lots of other things. And it's been great to explore what you guys are doing and your support mechanism as. I'm hoping HE and all sectors change through the work and the investment and the time that you make. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully I've not upset you Americans too much. I'll try to be better next time. All the ingest. I love everybody.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Emily. Thanks for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was really great chatting with you guys. And if you make it to DC at any point, come see us in Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. And the American Dream, what you'll see in there is it's a global dream. It is the idea that it can work for everybody around the globe. So come on by and see us. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Amazing. The World Series of Education. We'll see you soon.